Hi, welcome to the Times of Israel's Daily Briefing. It is Monday, February 16th, and I'm Jessica Steinberg. I'm here today with founding editor, Times of Israel founding editor, David Horovitz. Hi, David.
Hey, Jessica, how you doing?
I am okay. How are you?
Good, thank you.
We are here to cover some of the latest headlines. We'll talk about Iran, what happened in Bnei Brak yesterday, as well as a Zman Yisrael, our Hebrew sister site, a poll that they did about the prime minister, and some of the latest issues with the hostages. So stay with us.
Hi, Paul Green. I'm also a journalist with the Jewish Inquirer.
Okay, massive.
It's the fourth largest UK Jewish publication in the UK.
Fourth.
In the UK.
Hello.
Hello.
Is this our genius reporter who was beaten by a blindfold kid at chess?
That's getting out. Yes, what do you want?
It's April Fool's Day next week, and I wanted to come up with a totally ridiculous story.
Well, why don't you just publish what you normally do?
What do you mean?
Wow.
Okay. David, let's start with Iran, because that is certainly still on our minds here, even though, we go back and forth with how top it is on the headlines. We had a bunch of different things that were coming out yesterday in terms of Iran, including Channel 12 revealing that it had live footage from the protests in January. Where do we feel like we stand right now with this? Are we, still putting water bottles in our sealed rooms, or are we taking a break and breathing a little bit, or diplomatic front? Take it from where you like.
I don't know. I think if you try to understand the headlines of the last, it's more than a few days now, it would seem that the prospect of American intervention in Iran is receding. And yet at the same time, the administration is bringing more and more forces into the region. So there's mixed signals there, and it may be that no final decision has been taken. But, in terms of the facts, we know that Iran's foreign minister is gearing up to meet with American officials for a second round of talks in this sort of group of talks. I think today maybe he's meeting with the head of the UN's nuclear watchdog, the IAEA. We know that Iran has been very resistant to expanding the talks to anything other than its nuclear program. Whereas Prime Minister Netanyahu was just in the States, this very brief emergency visit, and again reiterated yesterday in a speech to American Jewish leaders, the Conference of Presidents who are meeting here, that Israel has multiple requirements in terms of any deal that might take shape. Netanyahu is skeptical about a deal. But if there is to be a deal, the way he puts it, it has to cover the fact that there is no Iranian nuclear program, no enrichment. Enriched uranium has to go out of Iran. Their ballistic missile program has to stop, and they have to stop funding and arming proxies, on our northern border, on our southern border, the Houthis and so on. There's this huge gulf between what we know is the agenda for the talks and what Israel feels the talks would need to cover. So that's the first thing. And then within Iran, first of all, I think we should stress again the lack of real knowledge, right? Were 40, 50, 70,000 people killed by the regime, or 5 to 7,000 people killed by the regime? We don't know. We know the protests again yesterday of some kind, balcony protests, right? People coming out to decry their leadership. And we, as you say, Channel 12 screened last night footage from the night of January the 8th at the height of the protests by a camera person who had done stuff for them before and who they say knew he was filming for an Israeli television channel and therefore was definitely putting his life in. I think filming generally that night was cause for real concern. To be filming for an Israeli television channel, to have got that material out now. They didn't specify how he got it to them. The internet was down for a while. They said in the report that he couldn't transmit it for a while because the internet was out. They stressed that he was unharmed that night, but an incredibly high-risk thing for somebody to walk around in Iran, as he did, interview people, film the protests, and the footage very hard to see. It's at night, but pretty.
Send it to an Israeli.
And to get it to Israel.
Wow.
Yeah.
Crazy.
So, are Israelis stockpiling water? I think we're all, we've been through this before. I don't think there's a mood of national panic or anything like this. There's a we don't quite know what's going on, and this gulf between Trump having said help is on its way to the protesters, and now these very limited nuclear talks which don't address the protests. Trump saying the best thing would be for the regime to fall, but
The protesters saying they were hoping that the U.S. was going to
well,
save them, right?
they felt they had that signal. We
Right.
spoke. One of our reporters spoke to people in Iran, and yeah, they were waiting for salvation from the United States and from Israel.
Right, right. Okay, switching gears a little bit. So Zman Yisrael, our sister site, has been conducting polls for how long? Has
Well,
it been?
the last few months,
Last few
on a
months.
weekly basis, yeah.
So this latest poll from Zman Yisrael, basically polling Israelis about Netanyahu's account of what happened prior to October 7th, showing that a good 50% of Israelis out of those polled do not necessarily believe that he did not know what could be coming down the pike. I believe it was another 20% or so said they did not agree with that. Another 10% were undecided. And then you sort of, I tend to look at that in terms of what the elections could look like. That's so, I guess maybe we all do something like that. Thoughts about thoughts about the polls generally and what they tend to show as they come out on a weekly basis about what Israelis are thinking about this one in particular.
Yeah, so first of all, Zman Yisrael, which is our sister site, and lots of other media outlets do polling generally about once a week. Most of the polls, I mean, I think all the polls, in fact, for the last since October the 7th, have shown that the current Netanyahu coalition could not build a majority. But most of them also show that the opposition doesn't have a majority, with the Arab parties holding the balance of power. It shifts the fact that the Arab parties have at least formally said they will run together in a joint list, change the electoral math a little bit. But the bottom line is it seems as though we're going to be heading into another close election. The election has to be held by October.
Right.
There are suggestions that Netanyahu wants to bring it forward to a moment of his preference. But, we're into election season one way or another anyway. And in the run-up to the election, and essentially since October the 7th, Netanyahu has been determinedly fostering a dialogue that minimizes the blame that attaches to him for October the 7th and deflects it to others, including not so long ago, last week, releasing his own testimony to a state controller inquiry, which is not the state commission of inquiry that most Israelis want. So he released the full text of his 55-page reply to the state controller, which itself is selective, in some cases redacted, bits of quotation from various security cabinet and other protocols. And then there's been, the response to that was pretty furious, including from opposition leaders who said, this is such it's a skewed picture. You've created a skewed picture, a false narrative. His own defense minister of October the 7th, Yoav Gallant, basically said, we have a prime minister who is a liar. That is a quote. He went on television last week and said, I didn't think I would have to come to the studio and say, our prime minister is a liar. The prime minister is a liar. So this is a very fraught battle that is going on over the image. It extends more than that. This was a war sparked by Hamas's October the 7th invasion of Israel. Legislation that is being pushed through the Knesset on the memorial. They took the word massacre out of the headline of the legislation. Netanyahu recasts this war, and again, in his speech yesterday, did so as a war of revival, which creates the sense that this was something initiated by Israel to make things better, rather than a war that was the necessary response to an invasion that Israel failed to prevent when all the signs were there, that caused horrific losses, and that Israel had to then go and fight in order to prevent Hamas from trying to do this again. On the gravestones of the fallen, the government legislation is such that it will say war of revival, and if the families don't want it, it will say fell in battle without the specifics of it. And I've heard families in the last few days anguished. This is not a true reflection of what happened.
Don't want that on their
My beloved one was killed in the October the 7th massacre, or the war that followed that. The Defense Ministry is saying you don't have to say war of revival, but you can't put anything else. And there's a big battle. So this is all part of the image and so on. So that poll plays into that. A narrow majority of the respondents do not believe Netanyahu's account of what had happened. He's also dished a lot of dirt on the Shin Bet chief of the day who was hit back and so on, all kinds of stuff. And, you're right to see what does that mean for the election? There is something in that. In other words, if most of the public doesn't believe the prime minister, you might be forgiven that he'd have a hard time getting reelected. I would add a pretty strong caveat. We don't vote for a prime minister, we vote for parties, they build a coalition and so on. Netanyahu is still the most popular choice for prime minister when he's put up against rivals, Naftali Bennett, Yair Lapid and so on. And he's an incredible politician. We could tell stories for an hour here about Netanyahu, on the beach in Netanya one election evening at the, wading out into the sea and standing on a chair in Netanya with his suit pants rolled up and a megaphone, calling on people to go out to vote. I think it was like 8 or 9 in the evening, whereas his rival in that election, Benny Gantz, was pictured at the same time looking exhausted, slumped in the back of his car going home after a day of electioneering. This is an incredibly potent politician. And the very fact that there's any prospect at all of Netanyahu being re-elected when he was the prime minister
On October 7th.
on October 7th and for, almost every year for the previous 14 years, right, apart from a year and a half. And yet he is a very viable candidate to win the next election. That's a function of his extraordinary political skill.
Right. So, right. What do the polls tell? Okay. Let's go to a quick break. When we're back, we'll talk about what happened in Bnei Brak yesterday and a little bit about hostages. So stay with us.
You're essentially, I think, the only opposition leader who says clearly, yes, after the elections, we should form a coalition together with Arab parties like Ra'am. Other opposition leaders say explicitly that this won't happen. Their argument is that after October 7th, it's just impossible to form a coalition with a non-Zionist Arab party. Could you explain your position?
I think that we must replace the current coalition, the current government, as soon as possible. If in order to get the 61 mandates which are needed to forge a new coalition, so what's the problem sitting with Mansour Abbas? Mansour Abbas is a leader that totally accepted the following principle. Israel is a Jewish state and at the same time, free, democratic and egalitarian state. So I have no problem to sit with him. If you accept, the very basic nature of Israel, I can understand, the method or, the policy of Lieberman or Bennett. All right, they want to bring, more and more voters from the right. All right, I can understand it.
You need that
do
in
not
order to
accept
win.
it, but I can understand it. But I truly don't understand why Eisenkot and Lapid refuse to accept, my own very natural, very simple principle. All right, we must replace this government. And I just wonder, let's assume that we get, alone, without an Arab party, only 58 mandates. So what is next? Are we willing to launch another, election campaign, or we are willing to forge a new government? I think that the second choice is much better.
Okay, David, a very, I wouldn't say unexpected, but hard to watch scenes in Bnei Brak yesterday as 2 young female soldiers went to visit a soldier an ultra-Orthodox soldier, an enlistee whose family lives in Bnei Brak. They were wearing their madim, their uniform. They were wearing actually skirts. I don't know if they normally wear skirts as part of their uniform. And they were basically attacked by a mob, which became a much larger mob, which became a mob scene in Bnei Brak. A police car was overturned. There was burning. And of course, there were lots of remarks and reactions to this event on both sides of the political spectrum last night. And obviously, it feeds into the ongoing issue of the anti-enlistment in legislation in the Knesset and in the community itself. Thoughts from you about what yesterday shows us, doesn't show us?
Well, I think maybe the most important thing to state first is to note the comments by the Chief of Staff of the Army, who said it is outrageous that IDF soldiers, men or women, cannot move around freely in Israel. These were 2 soldiers going to visit somebody. They didn't take their guns with them because they didn't want to provoke anything, as you
They
say.
weren't going to arrest anyone.
Right? They were not doing arrests of draft dodgers.
Right.
They were doing their utmost to not prompt. I mean, it's ridiculous that they felt they had to do this, but to not provoke. It's ridiculous. I mean, I don't have the words. They're in Israel, you understand. They're in a suburb of Tel Aviv, right? And they were attacked because they were wearing uniform. Apparently, some people thought they had come to arrest draft dodgers. Well, okay. So it would be okay to attack them in that case?
Right.
As it happens, they weren't. It is unforgivable. It's pathetic in terms of the police. We've had a lot of coverage. We have a very good reporter, Sam Sokol, who's been to a lot of these demonstrations and has written about the police are just generally not there. The police...
This is the Tel Aviv police chief, right?
Right. The Tel Aviv police chief said you should have coordinated it with us first. But the fact is, there's any kind of effective policing. Why have people not been arrested in the past? Why has the full weight of the law not come down? This is not the first such scenes that we have seen. Why in the past do police not attend demonstrations? Why do they allow the roads to be blocked and so on? I mean, this is, I don't even know what is the most appropriate terminology. Domestic insurrection, whatever you want to call it. It's outrageous, it's extraordinary, and it's being incited and encouraged by some of the ultra-Orthodox rabbinical and political leadership. When you have leaders of communities saying, either themselves saying or endorsing sentiments like we will die rather than enlist, and saying things like anyone who's involved in arresting draft dodgers will have no place in the world to come. I mean, this is this terrible mix of we know the will of God, and this is what God prescribes, with day-to-day politics. The fact is that the fastest growing community in Israel does not do national service of any kind in its vast majority, and this current coalition is seeking to entrench that because otherwise it has no majority. I mean, those are the fundamentals here. It's outrageous. And again, we've said it so many times. In the modern Orthodox community, which has paid a terribly high price for its heroic military service, they're being told by this community, you're not proper Jews defending the homeland of the Jewish people. We're the proper Jews who don't defend it because God is on our side. I don't know the will of God. I kind of think God helps those who help themselves. In my understanding of any higher powers, I don't think that what is playing out as some kind of a religious obligation, right, to attack soldiers walking through the street of the world's only Jewish state, I don't think that's what the higher powers have in mind.
Right.
And we're allowing it to persist. It's extraordinary and so damaging.
Right. Okay, let's turn to a final subject, hostages, who I've been covering more. And the latest story is, of course, there was a big interview on TV on Friday night of two former hostages, Arbel Yehud and Ariel Cunyo, who were a couple on October 7th and were each taken hostage and each held alone for the entirety of their captivity. And a lot of these former hostages, including this couple, are doing crowdfunding.
So let me ask you,
Yeah,
let's reverse roles here.
Yeah.
First of all, the testimony that continues to come out is so harrowing. Arbel Yehud spoke about in the last few days about sexual assault almost every day or every day.
Just
Right.
a little bit of it.
Right. She and people are not pushing her to say more about it, but awful revelations all the time, and I suspect this will carry on. But explain to me crowdfunding because they need resources, because what? Because the state is failing to provide what?
So I'm trying to find that out, actually. There is some crowdfunding on the part of some hostages. I would say most are not crowdfunding. There is funding for former hostages and their immediate family, not generally for the larger circle of family, who also sometimes were very involved in the struggle to bring them home. There's an organization called Hostage 255 that is raising money both from the government, from ministries, from ministry budgets, and from all kinds of foundations worldwide. So there is funding. The question I'm trying to find out is it not enough? Is it not enough to provide for their therapy? Is it that there was so much that was destroyed in their lives that it can't possibly be enough what is provided, and they need much more than that? Arbel Yehud, we sent text messages back and forth to each other. And she spoke about dreams, which I wrote about in this story, about going into space and meeting Messi, the Argentinian soccer star, because her boyfriend's family is Argentinian. And I don't think they were necessarily crowdfunding for that, but also about rebuilding a home and having a wedding. And clearly the funding from the government is not going to pay for a wedding.
Right. Let me ask you, it's very hard to generalize. I kind of wouldn't want you to generalize,
Impossible.
but excuse me. But the hostages, I mean, I assume some of them have somehow recovered to some extent and are putting their lives back together. Some are in a worse place. The families, I cannot imagine the kind of traumas that they are dealing with. Give us a sense of it's. I mean, it is a community, but it's not a community. It's vast numbers of individuals whose lives have been, dropped into the most appalling anguish, and in some cases, hostages came back. In other cases, hostages did not come back. What's your sense of that? Like I say, community is not the right word.
It really depends. The family units who were reunited, they seem to be doing better, those with children, those who have that day-to-day demand of kids and school, and they still do lots of activities and therapies that are provided by different organizations. They need those kinds of experiences, and they often do them together, several hostage families together. The young people that came back, and again, families are now united and complete, also, for the most part, seem to be doing okay. Like a lot of the young guys who came back on October 13th, 5 of them are on a trip to Brazil right now. A whole bunch of them who were released a year ago and who were released recently are in Thailand. And you see, I follow them on Instagram and I see what you see, right? I don't hear the conversations. They seem to be doing okay. They seem to be celebrating life together. What I worry about, or I think what we all worry about, are those who we don't see. The vast number of them we don't hear from, we don't see from them, they're not doing interviews, that no one wants to interview anymore, very, very seldom. And some are brave enough to talk about the abuse that they experienced, but they don't want to talk about it endlessly.
No, look,
right?
This is for journalists. You obviously the public wants to know, but the public doesn't need to know everything.
Yeah.
People who don't want to speak, I'm sure you do, and we do respect that they don't want to speak. What you're saying is that there are lots of people who we really don't know how they're getting on, right?
The vast number. I don't think we know. And will we ever know? I'm not really sure. I always say to the people that I'm in touch with, I'm here to listen if you want to tell me.
Right.
And if you don't, I'm certainly not going to nudge you,
Right.
Because I respect your privacy. And I'll also say one more interesting thing. I was on a plane back from California the other day, and on the plane were the Berman twins, Gali and Ziv, who were from Kibbutz Kfar Aza. They were with their aunt, Maccabit Meyer, who was the front of the struggle for them, their mother, who had been dealing with ill health, and I think an older brother. And it was a El Al plane, so full of Israelis, and I was with them on the way and on the way back. I found out that they had been speaking in San Diego, but no one bothered them. The celebrity
Knew who they were.
Everyone
and
knew who
left
they
them.
were. Everyone would look and sort of nod and smile sometimes, but no one
Nice.
went up to them and nudged them and said, "I'm so glad to see you," or what,
Right.
or whatever.
So that's encouraging.
And
I
I
have to hear.
think that's part of it.
Okay.
Thanks, David. Thanks for listening to the Times Visuals Daily Briefing. Thanks to David
Sure,
for being
Jessica.
with me
Thank you.
today. This episode is produced by Ari Schlacht. Until next time, take care and be well.